Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a profoundly universal experience. You know that creeping sensation that no matter how much you actually achieve, it's somehow just never quite enough? Like, are you constantly chasing the next career milestone or relationship goal or life status, only to realize the satisfaction fades almost instantly? Well, drawing on the philosophical and psychological insights of the YouTuber Ben Thomas, who you might know better as Sisyphus55, we're going to completely unpack the architecture of that exact feeling. We'll be exploring the psychology of memory, the very real pain of nostalgia, and why achieving our biggest life goals often leaves us feeling, quite frankly, totally empty. Imagine this for a second. You finally cross the finish line. The confetti drops, that big promotion is yours, you close on the house, or you finally win over the person of your dreams. But shortly after the noise of the celebration fades out, you're left alone, and this lingering emptiness starts to creep in. The 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer actually called this exact moment the devil's laughter. It's that crushing, almost mocking realization that the struggle is over, your goals officially achieved, and yet, the permanent peace and salvation you were absolutely sure was coming, it completely eluded you. You're just left staring into the void, asking, is this all there is? And this profound emptiness isn't just about goal setting either. It's inextricably tied to the existential dread of getting older and that terrifying countdown of our finite potential. So let's start with Section 1, the weight of becoming, focusing on aging and finite potential. Which brings us to Section 2, the remembering self, and how we actually edit our memory into fiction. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at psychologist Daniel Kahneman's brilliant dual processing model. He basically splits human consciousness into two distinct entities, the experiencing self and the remembering self. Now, the experiencing self is who you are right in this exact moment, living strictly in a fleeting, roughly 3-second window of the present. But the remembering self, that's your internal storyteller. It's this active internal editor that weaves everything you do into a cohesive narrative. And what's crazy is that, so often, we don't do things just to genuinely enjoy them in the moment. We do them so our remembering self has a good story to tell later. We will literally sacrifice the actual joy of our 3-second present reality just to feed this fictional narrative. We spend our lives trapped inside our own heads, totally bound to heavily edited memories instead of experiencing the raw reality of right now. And this dual self-concept brilliantly explains why nostalgia isn't just a happy, warm retreat into our childhood memories like we usually think it is. It's actually a deeply complex and painful psychological process. Just look at the word itself. It comes from the Greek roots nostos, meaning returning home, and algos, meaning pain. It literally translates to the pain of returning home. So nostalgia is, by definition, a painful yearning for something that no longer exists. And to be totally honest, something that might never have existed the way our remembering self insists it did. And hey, this isn't just abstract philosophy. There's hard data backing this up. Psychologist Laura King did this fascinating study on divorced women that perfectly captures the actual mechanics of nostalgia. She found that when these women heavily elaborated on their lost possible selves, the lives they assumed they were going to have before the divorce happened, their day-to-day happiness actually dropped initially, but their maturity grew significantly. So nostalgia acts as a necessary mourning of these lost possible selves. By painfully revisiting what could have been, we build the emotional maturity and personal growth required to eventually find our footing again and celebrate what's still to come. All right, let's move into Section 3, the myth of arrival and the mirage of future peace. So we've established that the past is basically a heavily edited fiction, right? Well, our view of the future is just as distorted. And that brings us to dismantling what's called the myth of arrival. This is that pervasive, deeply false belief that securing a specific career, buying the dream house, or finding the perfect partner is finally going to grant us endless calm. In psychology, they call the reality of this the hedonic treadmill. See, humans have a default baseline level of happiness. Whether you win the lottery or suffer a massive setback, eventually your happiness just returns to that baseline. Yet, we keep setting these extrinsic goals. We achieve them, we feel a tiny brief spike of satisfaction, and then, bam, we immediately crash right back into boredom and restlessness, which forces us to set a whole new goal. We get trapped in this continuous, exhausting rat race to the top, completely ignoring the hard truth that our baseline happiness rarely ever shifts. Because we're stuck on this treadmill, we are constantly chasing what we can call the phantom in the mirror. We rely heavily on this illusion that some future milestone is going to finally unlock our best self. We tell ourselves, if I just land this job, I'll finally be that confident, perfectly organized person I know I'm meant to be. But here's the tough love. That flawless future self is a phantom. It doesn't exist. And the longer you wait for that phantom to magically arrive and save you from the messiness of your current life, the more you miss out on the reality of who you actually are today. Let's look at how to break out of this in Section 4, the courage of hopelessness, moving from the summit to the climb. We find ourselves at a pretty profound philosophical crossroads here. If our past is a fiction and our future is a hoax, what exactly are we left with? How do we find any freedom in the messy, chaotic reality of the present moment? The philosopher Alan Watts starkly reminds us of our dilemma with this brilliant quote. He argues that unless you are able to live fully in the present, the future is entirely a hoax. Think about it. If you treat your life as just a series of future checkpoints, you're practically guaranteeing that you will never truly be content with where you are right now. When your grand plans finally do mature, you'll just be living for some other distant future beyond that. There is no magical arrival point. To combat this exhausting cycle of future chasing, the existentialist philosopher Albert Camus suggests we need to adopt the courage of hopelessness. He points to the Greek myth of Sisyphus, the guy condemned for eternity to roll a massive boulder up a mountain only to watch it roll right back down to the bottom every single time. But instead of despairing, Camus says we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because Sisyphus completely abandons the poison of future salvation. He has zero illusions that the boulder is one day going to just stay at the top. Instead, he rebels. He finds absolute lucidity and freedom by fully embracing the unreasonableness of his present struggle. Now, we can actually put this absurd rebellion into practice in our own lives through the ancient Taoist concept of trained spontaneity. Now, this isn't about just wild, reckless behavior. It's about shutting all those exhausting anxieties we hold regarding the future and instead finding absolute, profound immersion in the task right in front of us. It's developing the ability to engage so deeply with the mundane, everyday actions of the present that we enter a state of total flow, completely unburdened by the need for external outcomes or validation. This whole mindset is beautifully captured in the old Taoist story of Kukding. The story goes that Kukding achieved such a profound state of flow and present awareness that he was able to cut meat perfectly using the exact same knife for 19 years without the blade ever dulling. And his secret? He didn't focus on finishing the job quickly just so he could go home. He paid incredibly close attention to each gap, each point of thickness, totally flowing with the process itself. By actively discarding external outcomes and focusing entirely on the immediate process, he found deep, energizing satisfaction in what was otherwise a really mundane struggle. So, the overarching lesson from all of these incredible thinkers is remarkably clear, and it's something every single one of us can tap into right now. Real peace isn't waiting for you at the top of the corporate ladder, it isn't waiting in a shiny new relationship, and it certainly doesn't live in the romanticized, edited memories of your childhood. True peace exists only in the fleeting 3-second window of the experiencing self. When you finally stop relying on the heavy fictions of your past or the psychological hoax of a future arrival, you can finally detach from the need for extrinsic outcomes. You realize that true freedom has literally been waiting for you in the present all along. So I want to leave you with this. Considering that there is no magical destination waiting to save you, and there is no flawless version of yourself waiting in the mirror of the future, what's holding you back? The boulder is going to roll back down the hill regardless of how hard you push it today. So what is stopping you from finding your invincible summer, embracing the beautiful messiness of the present, and finally just enjoying the climb? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.
So I want you to picture this scenario for a second. You have been striving for something for years, right? Maybe even a decade.
Oh yeah, like a massive promotion at work that finally gets you into the executive suite.
Exactly. Or, maybe it's the day of your wedding. An event you've spent like 18 months obsessing over down to the exact color of the napkin.
Or finally getting the keys to a house that you actually own, like with a mortgage that has your name on it.
Yes, exactly that. You put in the blood, the sweat, the endless hours of anticipation, the sacrifices, and then the moment actually happens. The confetti drops.
Champagne gets popped.
Right, you get all the congratulations texts on your phone. But I want you to focus on the moment right after that. What happens the morning after the confetti drops?
When all the guests go home.
Yeah, and you wake up on just a random Tuesday. Why does that lingering, quiet emptiness almost always creep in? That feeling that you climbed the entire mountain, looked around, and just thought, wait, is this it?
That quiet, unsettling vacuum. is honestly one of the most profound psychological experiences a human being can have.
It's so universal, too.
It really is. It's the exact moment you realize the finish line didn't, magically transform you into a completely different, permanently happy person.
Because we are totally conditioned to expect a metamorphosis, right?
We are. We really think achieving the goal is going to somehow rewrite our DNA. Like it will cure our anxieties and just make us whole.
But the reality is so different.
Yeah, you just wake up the next morning as the exact same person with the exact same brain, drinking the exact same coffee. Only now, you don't have that defining goal to distract you from yourself anymore.
Okay, let's really unpack this today. Because that feeling, that post-achievement letdown, that existential hangover is something basically everyone deals with.
Oh, absolutely. It hits the CEO and the college student exactly the same way.
And that is exactly what we're going to explore today. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to decode a universal modern crisis that we're calling the myth arrival.
It's such a great term for it.
It is, right. And we are using the analytical worldview of the prominent video essayist Ben Thomas, who operates under the name Sisyphus55, as our primary lens today.
Thomas has this really fascinating way of synthesizing complex philosophy for the modern digital age.
He does. And we are going to use that framework to figure out why we are just constantly, chronically restless as a society.
And I have to say, the framework we are dealing with here is incredibly robust. It doesn't just look at this problem from one single angle.
Right. We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We are going to be weaving together the behavioral and evolutionary psychology of Daniel Kahneman, the existentialism of Albert Camus and Arthur Schopenhauer, and even the ancient practicality of Taoist philosophy.
So basically, we are deconstructing the mechanics of our own minds.
Exactly. We need to understand why our memories actively deceive us, and why our meticulously laid future plans are often just a psychological trap.
And how the stark biological reality of aging forces us to either completely rethink how we find peace, or just spend the rest of our lives running on a treadmill of dissatisfaction.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark choice when you lay it out like that.
I just love how ambitious this is. I mean, we are going to figure out why we are restless by literally deconstructing the human perception of time.
Which is no small task.
No, it's not. And to do that, I think we have to start at the beginning. We have to look at the weight of becoming, the sheer biological and existential reality of just moving through time.
Because time does not feel the same at age 10 as it does at age 40, does it?
Not at all. The subjective experience of existing completely warps as we get older.
It shifts drastically. And there is a very deep psychological reason for it. I mean, think about the phenomenology of childhood.
Like how we perceive the world when we're little.
Right. When you were young, your future is basically perceived as this infinite horizon. The world hasn't yet forced you to specialize or narrow yourself down.
You can be an astronaut, a veterinarian, a poet, or, somehow all three simultaneously.
Exactly. The possibilities are, subjectively speaking, completely boundless. But as you move through time, the biological clock ticks, and that infinite horizon begins to transform into a countdown.
A countdown of finite potential. That is such a heavy phrase.
It is, but it's true. The sheer act of aging forces us to transition from a state of boundless potential into a very stark, inescapable awareness of our own finitude.
We basically realize the runway is getting shorter.
Precisely.
That makes total sense when you think about how our relationship to birthdays changes over time.
Oh, birthdays are the perfect example of this.
Right, because when you were a kid, a birthday is the ultimate triumph. It is a massive celebration of getting bigger, getting more autonomy, unlocking new levels of life.
You're just gaining things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, maybe at 30, definitely by 40 or 50, that excitement just flips. It starts to trigger this creeping, low-level dread.
Yeah, a birthday stops being a milestone of growth and starts feeling like an audit of what you haven't accomplished yet.
And the underlying mechanism of that dread isn't just vanity, right? Like, it's not just about getting wrinkles or gray hair.
No, not at all. It goes much, much deeper into the core of how we construct our actual identity.
How so?
Well, aging forces us to constantly loosen our ties to concrete, familiar versions of ourselves. You are no longer, the precocious student or the young up-and-comer.
We're the unstoppable college athlete.
Right. Those identities literally die off. Furthermore, every single choice you make as you age inherently kills off other possibilities.
So the cone of possibilities just keeps narrowing.
Exactly. Choosing one career path means you are actively killing off the potential of another. Choosing to marry one person means abandoning the potential of all others.
Choosing to put down roots in one city means you won't live the life you could have had in another city.
Yeah. So the dread we feel on our birthdays is largely unacknowledged grief. It's the grief of narrowing our potential, of watching the doors close one by one as we commit to a singular path.
There is this really vivid example in the analysis of Thomas's work that hit me so hard when I was reviewing the sources.
Which one?
It talks about the mundane shock of looking in the mirror on a random Tuesday morning. You look at your own reflection and you suddenly realize that the happy-go-lucky kid who was just out in the backyard looking for dinosaur bones in the dirt has been entirely replaced.
Replaced by an adult.
Yeah, replaced by this exhausted adult who is suddenly burdened by tax brackets, caffeine addiction, and existential dread. And there's this profound cognitive dissonance.
It's like, where did that kid go?
Exact. How did I get here? Because from the inside, we don't feel like we've aged. We still feel like that kid just trapped in an older body with way more responsibilities.
That cognitive dissonance is terrifying because it highlights something we rarely want to admit.
Which is what?
How much of our identity is just a fragile construct maintained by memory? Our sense of self isn't a solid physical object. It is basically a narrative we are constantly telling ourselves.
To emphasize how terrifying the fragility of that narrative is, the sources bring in a really fascinating reference to an audio project. It's called Everywhere at the End of Time by The Caretaker.
Yes, the Dementia Simulation Project.
Exactly. It is a 6.5-hour ambient album specifically designed to simulate the cognitive deterioration of dementia through music. I am actually familiar with that project, and it is genuinely one of the most unsettling pieces of art out there.
It really is. It's a difficult listen.
It starts off in the first stage with this very pleasant, slightly crackly, familiar big band ballroom music from the 1920s or 30s. It feels warm and nostalgic.
Very comforting.
But then slowly, imperceptibly over the course of hours, the loops start to stutter, the melodies distort, the pitch bends in these really sickening ways.
Until by the final stages, it is just chaotic, terrifying, unrecognizable acoustic noise. The melody is completely gone.
Yeah, it just evaporates into static.
And the reason that album is so effective and so deeply relevant to our discussion of the myth of arrival is that it forces the listener to confront the sheer terror of cognitive decline.
It really highlights our desperate reliance on memory to anchor our existence.
Exactly. Because if our memories begin to fade, distort, or fracture, who are we really?
The album is a visceral reminder that our entire sense of self, all our grand achievements, all our future plans are basically tethered to a neurological hard drive that is entirely impermanent and biologically vulnerable.
It completely strips away the illusion of permanence. It forces us to realize that we are just biological organisms moving through a countdown.
That makes me think of this analogy. It's like human existence is being on a moving train where we can't see the final destination.
Okay, I like that.
But the longer we travel, the more we realize we're running out of track. The landscape outside is rushing by faster and faster. And the sheer panic of that realization, the knowledge of our own finitude, makes us want to sprint to the back of the train.
We press our faces against the rear window and stare obsessively at the track we've already covered.
Exactly, because looking backward feels safe. The past is already written. It can't surprise us.
The train analogy captures the behavioral reflex perfectly, actually. When the future becomes a source of anxiety, when the track starts running out and the pressure of becoming our best selves gets too heavy, our natural human reaction is to run to the back of the train.
We just retreat into the past to find a sense of comfort and stability.
Yeah. But here is the critical pivot in human psychology that we have to understand today. The past we are retreating into doesn't actually exist.
Wait, what do you mean it doesn't exist?
I mean, it is heavily edited. It is a highly fictionalized version of reality curated by our own brains.
So we're trying to escape the terrifying anxiety of the future by retreating into a past that isn't even real. We're taking shelter in a mirage.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. We rely on memory to construct our identity, to tell ourselves who we are. But human memory is largely a work of fiction.
And this is where the science gets truly fascinating, especially when we look at the work of the Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman.
Yes, his dual processing model of the self is incredibly important here.
So Kahneman talks about the experiencing self versus the remembering self.
Right. And this theory is essentially the skeleton key for unlocking why we are so constantly dissatisfied.
Walk us through it.
Well, to understand why we feel restless, we have to accept that we do not have one single unified consciousness processing our lives. We basically have two distinct selves, and they want completely different things.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with the experiencing self. What does that one do?
The experiencing self lives entirely in the present tense. It operates in a fleeting, roughly 3-second window of the now. That is its entire universe.
So just 3 seconds at a time.
Basically, yes. It feels the physical temperature of the room you are in right now. It registers the taste of the coffee hitting your tongue. It feels the slight, dull ache in your lower back from sitting in traffic.
So it experiences joy, pain, boredom, and pleasure in real time.
Exactly. But, and this is the crucial limitation, the experiencing self has absolutely no voice in making long-term decisions, and it has no role in forming your overarching identity.
Because it just exists in those 3 seconds, and then those 3 seconds evaporate, replaced by the next 3 seconds. It's just a continuous stream of sensory input.
Yeah, it has almost no storage capacity. And that brings us to the second entity, the remembering self.
And this is the one that causes all the trouble, right?
Oh, big time. The remembering self is the storyteller, the archivist. It takes those millions of discrete 3-second windows of experience, discards the vast majority of them, edits out the boring, painful, or mundane realities, and weaves a coherent, highly idealized narrative out of what's left.
So the remembering self is basically the PR department for your life.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The
Yeah.
PR department. Yes. The remembering self is the one that says, I had an idyllic childhood, or that 2-week vacation to Italy was absolute perfection.
Even if the experiencing self was actually miserable half the time.
Exactly. If you think back to a vacation, your experiencing self might have been dealing with itchy mosquito bites, a brutal sunburn, a delayed flight, and a massive argument with your spouse over directions.
But the remembering self just conveniently edits all that out.
Yep. It keeps the image of the beautiful sunset and the great glass of wine, and it logs the trip in your brain as perfect. We do not make choices between experiences. We make choices between memories of experiences.
Wow. And because our present moment is often chaotic, overwhelming, or just plain boring, and our future is entirely uncertain, we let the PR department, the remembering self, pull us backward.
We retreat into nostalgia. We long for the good old days.
But when we actually dig into the concept of nostalgia, it is not just a warm, fuzzy, comforting feeling, is it?
Not fundamentally, no.
Because we tend to view nostalgia as a harmless indulgence, like putting on an old, comfortable sweater. But the psychological reality is actually much darker.
Nostalgia is deeply misunderstood in popular culture. We treat it as a commodity to be sold back to us in movies and retro video games. But if you look at its etymological roots, it reveals its true nature.
Where does the word come from?
It was coined by a Swiss physician in the 17th century, combining two Greek words, nostos, which means the return home, and algos, which means pain or aching.
So nostalgia translates literally to the pain of returning home.
Yes, the pain of returning home. It was actually originally classified as a psychological illness. It is an aching, a profound grieving for a time, a place, or state of being that is irrevocably gone.
Oh, wow. That paints it in a much more painful light. It's not just fondness, it's the agony of returning to a home that you can't actually enter anymore.
Right. You are locked out staring through the window at a heavily edited, fictionalized story created by your remembering self.
The reality of that home was never as perfect as you remember it, but you are aching for the fiction anyway.
That's the crux of the trap.
There is a deeply powerful metaphor used in the analysis of this phenomenon, drawn from Sylvie Plath's novel The Bell Jar. It's the fig tree metaphor, and I think it perfectly encapsulates why nostalgia hurts so much.
Oh, Plath's fig tree metaphor is absolutely incredible. It is perhaps one of the most devastatingly accurate descriptions of the agony of lost potential that fuels our nostalgia.
Can you break down how she describes it in the book?
Sure. In the book, the protagonist describes sitting in the crotch of a beautiful, sprawling green fig tree, basically slowly starving to death. On every single branch of this tree, there is a fat, ripe, purple fig.
And every fig represents a different, wonderful, entirely distinct future she could choose, right?
Yes. One fig represents a happy home, a husband, and children. Another fig is a brilliant career as a famous poet. Another fig is a life of adventure, traveling the world. Another fig is becoming a brilliant professor.
The tragedy is that she wants all of them.
She does, but she is paralyzed. Because choosing one fig, reaching out and picking one specific life path, inherently means she cannot pick the others.
And as she sits there, paralyzed by indecision, terrified of making the wrong choice, what happens?
The figs begin to wrinkle. They turned black, and one by one, they dropped to the ground and rotted at her feet.
Choosing one life path inherently means watching all the other possible versions of yourself die. That is so brutal.
It is brutal, but it's the reality of time. Every choice is a small murder of an alternate self. And nostalgia is our psychological way of mourning those fallen figs.
So when we feel nostalgic, we aren't just missing the past.
No, we are mourning those lost possible selves, the lives we didn't choose, the versions of us that will never get to exist because we took the job in Chicago instead of New York, or because we married this person instead of that person.
We aren't just missing the objective past, we are grieving the boundless potential we used to have when we were children, before the realities of time and choice forced us to narrow our lives down to a single branch.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
We miss the infinite horizon.
But wait, if nostalgia is mourning something that never actually happened, these hypothetical alternative lives, is it just a toxic habit? Are we just narcissistically crying over a fantasy?
Well, that's a great question. And to ground this in some empirical data, psychologists have actually studied how people process these lost selves.
There is a fascinating study by psychologist Laura King, right, that focused on a group of divorced women.
Yes, Laura King's study provides incredible insight into the utility of this grief. She studied divorced women specifically to understand how they processed the traumatic shift in their life trajectory.
How does she go about it?
She asked these women to vividly and extensively describe two different things. First, their lost pre-divorce possible self, meaning the life they thought they were going to have, the idealized future of growing old with their partner that was now dead.
The dead fig.
The dead fig, exactly.
Yeah.
Second, she asked them to describe their found possible self, the new, unexpected reality and future they now had to build from scratch.
So what were the findings? Did dwelling on the lost life just make them miserable?
The findings were incredibly nuanced and actually really counterintuitive. The women who were able to vividly, elaborately, and honestly describe their lost pre-divorce possible self showed lower initial levels of happiness.
So they were visibly in pain? They were actively grieving?
They were. However, over time, those same women showed significantly greater maturity and ego development.
Wow.
By staring at the dead fig on the ground, by acknowledging the pain of the loss rather than repressing it, they grew stronger and much more complex as individuals.
So the pain was actually the catalyst for growth. But what about happiness? Did they just stay mature but miserable forever?
No, and this is the second half of the finding, which is so crucial. The women who could elaborate on their found possible self, who could acknowledge the loss, but then turn their attention to the new path ahead with clarity, eventually achieved both high maturity and high levels of happiness.
They integrated the loss and moved forward.
Exactly. They digested the grief.
I do want to push back on this a little bit, though, because it is so easy to romanticize grief. If we know that Kahneman's remembering self is basically a fiction writer, and if we're longing for an idealized past that wasn't even as good as we remember it, isn't nostalgia still fundamentally a trap?
How do you mean?
Well, if I sit around mourning the fact that I didn't become a professional musician, I'm basically mourning a fantasy. I might have been a terrible musician. I might have hated the touring life. Isn't indulging in that nostalgia just a way to avoid doing the hard work of living my actual life right now?
That is the danger, absolutely. And it is a very common trap, what psychologists might call nostalgic entrapment.
Nostalgic entrapment.
Right. If you use nostalgia as an escape room, a place to hide from the friction and difficulty of your present reality, then yes, it becomes a toxic, paralyzing force. You just sit in the tree starving.
But the psychological framework we are exploring pushes back against the idea that nostalgia is inherently bad.
It does. Nostalgia is actually a highly functional, necessary form of emotional processing. Acknowledging that our past was impermanent and critically accepting that our memories are faulty and idealized allows us to process our grief for those lost potentials.
You have to mourn the fallen figs in order to fully appreciate and digest the one you were actually eating.
That's a great way to summarize it. Nostalgia is meant to be a transitionary phase of integration, a way of saying goodbye. It is not meant to be a permanent residence.
Okay, that clarifies it. We have to recognize the past as a museum, a highly curated, somewhat fictionalized museum. We can walk through the exhibits, we can appreciate the history, we can even shed a tear for the exhibits that are closed, but we cannot set up a sleeping bag and lid in the museum.
The museum closes at 5 p.m. We have to go back outside.
Exactly. But when we step outside, because the present is often difficult, our natural human instinct is to sprint in the exact opposite direction.
Towards the future.
Right. If the past can't save us, We try to build a perfect, bulletproof future to save us instead. But according to behavioral psychology, sprinting toward the future leads us directly into the most dangerous psychological trap of all.
And this brings us to the absolute core of our deep dive today, deconstructing the myth of arrival.
The myth of arrival.
Yes, the myth of arrival is a culturally enforced, deeply embedded, and biologically driven belief that achieving a specific, extrinsic milestone will finally grant us permanent peace, lasting happiness, and existential fulfillment.
It is the ultimate if-then statement that dictates almost all of modern society. If I get the corner office, then I will be respected.
If I find the perfect partner and get married, then I will never feel lonely again.
If I buy the 4-bedroom house in the good neighborhood, then I will finally feel safe and successful. It is the belief that there is a finish line where the struggle ends and you get to just exist in a state of permanent bliss, then I will have arrived.
And it is a total neurological illusion. The finish line does not exist.
Okay, this is where it gets real. Why doesn't it exist?
To understand why this is a myth, we have to examine the biological and psychological mechanism known as the hedonic treadmill, which is also referred to in literature as the adaptation principle.
How does the treadmill work?
Well, human beings have a biological baseline of happiness, a sort of default setting that is relatively stable over time. When we achieve a massive goal, let's say you finally get that massive promotion, you double your salary, and you get the title you've wanted for a decade, you experience a sharp, intoxicating spike in pleasure and satisfaction.
Your dopamine pathways just light up. You feel incredible.
But the human brain is highly adaptive.
Yeah.
Very rapidly, usually within a matter of months, you habituate to that new reality.
So the new reality just becomes normal.
Exactly. The double salary just becomes your new normal. The fancy title becomes mundane. You adapt, and your subjective happiness level drops right back down to your baseline.
Let's talk about the evolutionary why behind this, because it seems like a really cruel trick for biology to play on us. Why did we evolve to be chronically dissatisfied?
It does seem cruel, but if you think about it from a survival standpoint, it makes total sense.
Right, because if our hunter-gatherer ancestors killed a mammoth and felt permanent, blissful satisfaction, they would have sat around the fire celebrating for the rest of their lives.
They would have stopped hunting. They would have stopped innovating.
And they would have starved to death in the winter. Evolution doesn't care if we are happy. Evolution cares if we survive and reproduce.
And the best way to keep an organism moving forward is to make sure its satisfaction is strictly temporary. We are biologically hardwired to always want more.
That evolutionary context is vital. We are running on hardware designed for survival in a hostile environment, but we are using it in a modern world of abundance.
This creates a severe psychological split, which researchers define as the distinction between pre-goal attainment and post-goal attainment.
What's the difference between the two?
Pre-goal attainment is the sustained, underlying sense of purpose and motivation we feel when making progress toward a target. It is the daily grind, the overcoming of obstacles, the feeling of momentum. Evolution rewards us heavily for being in pursuit.
And post-goal attainment.
Post-goal attainment, on the other hand, is the acute pleasure we feel right after the goal is reached.
And the tragic irony of human ambition is that post-goal attainment is incredibly short-lived. The high evaporates almost instantly.
We sacrifice years, sometimes decades of our lives, neglecting our families, destroying our health, suffering through massive stress and exhaustion, all for a post-goal high that lasts maybe a few days or weeks.
And when that chemical high evaporates, the vacuum returns. We achieve our wildest dreams, the confetti is swept up, and a week later we are sitting on the expensive couch in the expensive house thinking, okay, what's next? Why do I still feel empty?
It's a very common crisis. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer had a brilliant and frankly devastating term for this exact phenomenon. He called it the devil's laughter.
The devil's laughter, that gives me chills.
It perfectly captures the sinister nature of the hedonic treadmill. Schopenhauer observed that painful moment of absolute clarity right after an accomplishment, or even right after a strong biological urge is satisfied.
It is the moment all the tension, the striving, and the desire falls away.
Yes, you expect to find eternal peace underneath it, but instead, you are met with a crushing, hollow realization. You realize you are just a slave to blind striving, a biological machine programmed by nature to endlessly chase the next carrot on the stick.
You look around at your new corner office or your new sports car, and you whisper into the void, is this all there is?
That realization, The crushing weight of the anticlimax is the devil laughing at you for ever believing that achieving the goal would actually save your soul.
It's a terrifying concept, but I want to make sure we aren't just relying on 19th century philosophical pessimism here. To prove this isn't just Schopenhauer being a curmudgeon, we need to look at the empirical data.
And there's a lot of data to back this up.
Right. There's one highly famous psychological study from the late 1970s, the Brickman study, that compared the long-term happiness levels of two wildly different groups of people.
Yes, the lottery winners and the accident victims.
Massive lottery winners and victims of catastrophic accidents who suffered severe injuries resulting in paralysis.
The Brickman study is a foundational text in positive psychology because the results are so incredibly counterintuitive.
If you ask anyone on the street, they would naturally assume that the happiness levels of those two groups would diverge permanently and drastically.
Winning millions of dollars should make you permanently ecstatic, and becoming paralyzed should make you permanently devastated.
And initially, in the short term, that is exactly what happens. The lottery winners spike in happiness, and the accident victims plummet. But what happens when you follow up with them a year or two later?
That is where the hedonic treadmill reveals its power. The studies show that after a certain period of adaptation, usually a year or two, both the lottery winners and the accident victims returned incredibly close to their prior baseline level of well-being.
That is just mind-blowing.
Furthermore, the lottery winners actually reported finding less pleasure in mundane, everyday activities like eating breakfast or talking with a friend than the accident victims did.
Because their threshold for pleasure got warped by the millions of dollars.
Exactly. The massive external circumstance, no matter how extreme it was in either the positive or negative direction, did not permanently rewrite their internal capacity for happiness. The hedonic treadmill resets everyone.
The external world cannot fix the internal baseline. This reminds me of a truly incredible historical anecdote that ties directly into this pursuit of success.
Let's hear it.
In 1922, Albert Einstein was staying at the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, Japan. He had just recently been informed that he was going to win the Nobel Prize in physics. The man was literally at the apex of global fame and intellectual achievement.
He was on top of the world.
Literally. A Japanese bellboy came to his room to deliver a package. Einstein didn't have any cash on hand to tip the bellboy, so instead he grabbed a piece of hotel stationery and wrote down a single sentence in German.
And he gave it to the bellboy as a tip.
He handed it to the bellboy and told him to keep it, saying that if he was lucky, the note itself might one day be worth much more than a standard tip. And he was right. That piece of paper sold at auction in 2017 for over $1.5 million.
Wow.
But the monetary value isn't the point. The message on the paper is what matters. What did the man who had achieved everything write down? He wrote, "A calm and modest life brings more happiness than the pursuit of success combined with constant restlessness."
It is a profound statement, coming from the source it did. Einstein, a man who achieved the absolute pinnacle of human intellectual and societal success, a man who literally changed our understanding of the universe, was warning a bellboy against the exact restlessness we are discussing today.
He knew it firsthand.
He recognized firsthand that the constant striving to outdo oneself, the endless pursuit of the next milestone, the addiction to being recognized and achieving, is a guaranteed recipe for chronic dissatisfaction. Even winning a Nobel Prize won't turn off the devil's laughter.
But hold on. I have to play devil's advocate here because if we follow this logic to its absolute conclusion, it feels incredibly bleak.
How so?
Well, if arriving at the destination doesn't make us happy, and if the hedonic treadmill just resets our desires no matter what we do, and if Einstein is telling us success breeds restlessness, doesn't that make all human ambition completely and utterly pointless?
I see where you're going with this.
Why shouldn't we just give up? If nothing permanent comes from our effort, why shouldn't I just quit my job, lie on the couch, eat potato chips, and stare at the ceiling for the rest of my life? If it's all a biological trick, why put in the effort at all? Isn't this just a philosophical justification for apathy and mediocrity?
That is the exact friction point where most people get stuck. And it is a very valid response. The despair you are describing is the exact starting point for existentialism.
Okay, so how do the existentialists get off the couch?
The philosophers we are examining argue that apathy and stagnation are not the answer. Lying on the couch staring at the ceiling is just another form of misery. It's surrendering to the void. The answer to the hedonic treadmill isn't to stop struggling. The answer is to fundamentally, radically redefine our relationship to the struggle itself.
Which brings us to the next massive paradigm shift in this deep dive, the courage of hopelessness.
It's a great concept.
When you first hear that phrase, it sounds like an oxymoron. Hopelessness is usually associated with severe clinical depression, apathy, and giving up. How can hopelessness possibly require courage, let alone be a liberating psychological tool?
It is a provocative concept, heavily articulated by the contemporary philosopher Slavoj Žižek. He argues that in order to survive the crushing realization that we will never permanently arrive at our ideal selves, we must adopt the courage of hopelessness.
To understand this, we really have to redefine what hope actually means in a modern context, don't we?
We do, because we usually think of hope as a virtue. But Žižek argues that hope is often a mechanism of deferral.
A mechanism of deferral.
Yes, as long as we believe the future holds our salvation, as long as we secretly hope that a future promotion, a new relationship, or a change in scenery will magically fix our internal emptiness and finally make us feel complete, we are slaves to anxiety.
We are trapped in a state of suspended animation, constantly waiting for our real life to officially begin. We view the present moment merely as an annoying waiting room that we have to sit in until the future arrives to save us.
We treat today as the price we pay for tomorrow. And true freedom begins when we completely radically abandon that specific kind of hope.
Abandon the hope that the future will save us.
Exactly. Accepting that the universe is indifferent, accepting that the finish line is an illusion, and accepting that no extrinsic goal is ever going to magically save you is actually the most liberating thing you can do. When you give up the hope that the future will save you, you stop waiting. You stop deferring your existence.
Because if the future can't save you, you are forced to live in the present. You have to face the music right now, today, in the waiting room. The waiting room becomes the main event.
Yes. And this is where the French philosopher Albert Camus enters the picture, bringing his foundational concept of the absurd.
Camus provides the manual for how to live without hope, but with total passion.
He really does. Camus argued that human beings have a chronic, deep-seated biological urge for the world to make sense. We desperately want there to be a neat, objective purpose to our suffering. We want a cosmic scorecard that says we did a good job.
But the universe is fundamentally unreasonable, silent, and entirely indifferent to our need for meaning.
Exactly. The friction between our desperate desire for meaning and the cold, silent indifference of the universe is what Camus calls the absurd. We are tortured by our desire for a final arrival point that the universe simply refuses to provide.
And to illustrate how a human being can survive this psychological torture without resorting to delusion or suicide, Camus uses one of the most famous myths in human history, the myth of Sisyphus.
Sisyphus is the perfect avatar for this.
Sisyphus, for those who might not remember their high school mythology, was a king who was condemned by the Greek gods to a very specific, agonizing punishment in the underworld. He was forced to roll a massive, incredibly heavy boulder up the side of a steep mountain.
He pushes and strains, putting every ounce of his being into getting it to the top.
But every single time he nears the peak, the boulder slips from his grasp and rolls all the way back down to the bottom of the valley. He is condemned to repeat this task of absolute futility for all eternity.
He has no hope of success, no hope of a better tomorrow, and no illusions about his fate. He knows with absolute certainty that he will never arrive.
It is the ultimate nightmare visualization of the hedonic treadmill. You do the grueling work, you get the briefest moment near the top, the rock falls, you get absolutely no permanent reward, and you have to do it all over again tomorrow.
But Camus takes this nightmare of futility and flips it entirely on its head with the most famous line of his essay.
After describing the agonizing trudge back down the mountain to retrieve the rock, Camus tells us that one must imagine Sisyphus happy.
Which sounds completely insane on the surface.
Yeah.
Why on earth would Sisyphus be happy? He is in hell performing useless labor.
He is happy precisely because he accepts his fate with total, uncompromising lucidity. He doesn't delude himself. He stops hoping for the gods to take pity and release him.
He stops hoping that maybe, just maybe, the boulder will miraculously stay at the top this time.
His lucidity, his complete lack of false hope, is the source of his freedom. Because he knows the summit will not save him, he spitefully and joyfully embraces the struggle itself.
The physical act of pushing the rock, the feeling of his muscles straining, the exertion, that becomes his purpose. Camus writes that the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart.
Sisyphus rebels against the meaninglessness of the universe by choosing to find joy in the exertion of pushing the rock.
He finds what Camus beautifully calls the invincible summer within himself, despite the harsh, eternal winter of his reality.
This is a massive paradigm shift. It's like we have been treating our entire lives like a video game where we are just endlessly, miserably grinding for experience points to reach a final boss that doesn't actually exist in the code of the game.
The game never ends.
So instead of being miserable, grinding for an ending that isn't real, we have to fundamentally fall in love with the mechanics of the game itself. Sisyphus isn't a victim being tortured by the gods. He is the ultimate rebel because he owns the boulder. He decides that the push is what matters, not the peak.
It is a radical shift in perspective. The focus shifts entirely from the destination, which is an illusion, to the journey, which is the only concrete reality. The effort becomes autotelic.
Autotelic. Where does that word come from?
It comes from Greek, auto meaning self, and telos meaning goal or end. An autotelic activity is one that has its own meaning and purpose within itself, not apart from it. You don't play a piece of music just to get to the final chord as fast as possible. The playing of the music is the point.
Owning the boulder and being autotelic sounds incredibly poetic when you are talking about Greek myths, kings in the underworld, and French existentialists smoking cigarettes in Parisian cafes. But let's bring this down to earth.
Okay, let's ground it.
How does the average person actually do that on a Tuesday morning at the office? The boulder in modern life isn't a literal rock. The boulder is waking up at 6 a.m., sitting in an hour of gridlock traffic, answering 100 emails by noon, putting out fires at work, going home, doing the laundry, and waking up on Wednesday to do it all again.
The inbox is empty on Friday, and it's full of 100 new emails on Monday. The rock rolls back down.
Exactly. How do we practically embrace that struggle without burning out entirely? How do you find an invincible summer in an Excel spreadsheet?
That is the pragmatic bridge we have to cross, moving from high-level philosophy to actionable psychology. How do we achieve peace? Through presence in the mundane reality of modern life. Psychological term for owning the boulder, for engaging in autotelic action, is flow.
Flow. This is the groundbreaking concept introduced by the renowned psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, right?
Yes, Csikszentmihalyi spent his career trying to figure out when human beings are actually at their happiest. He didn't find happiness in moments of passive leisure, like watching television. He found it in flow.
How does he define flow?
He defines flow as the state of total, immersive concentration in a specific activity. It is the zone. It happens when an activity is just challenging enough to require your full attention and skill, but not so difficult that it causes severe anxiety.
When you enter a flow state, whether you are coding a website, playing basketball, knitting, or analyzing that spreadsheet, something incredible happens neurologically.
The brain basically shifts gears.
It does. The default mode network in the brain, which is responsible for self-reflection and mind-wandering, quiets down. Self-scrutiny vanishes. The ego disappears.
The constant nagging voice of the remembering self shuts off. The passage of time completely distorts. Hours can feel like minutes because you are so locked in. Flow is the ultimate optimization of Kahneman's experiencing self.
Because in a flow state, you aren't agonizing in the remembering self about a mistake you made yesterday, and you aren't desperately projecting into the future, worrying about whether the spreadsheet will get you a promotion next year. You are fully, completely locked into the 3-second window of the present reality.
Precisely. And this stands in direct contrast to modern society's dominant mode of operation, which psychologists call a fixed mindset.
In a fixed mindset, every single action is viewed as a high-stakes test to prove your inherent worth.
Yes. If you fail the task, you believe you are a failure as a human being. Every task is a heavy, anxious burden meant to validate your identity. Entering flow requires giving up the ego. It requires abandoning the desperate need for external validation, letting go of the myth of arrival, and just interacting directly and intimately with the task at hand.
The analysis brings in the spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle here, who provides a really practical distinction that makes entering flow a bit easier to understand. He separates our conception of time into 2 distinct categories: clock time and psychological time.
Tolle's framework is highly useful for navigating modern life. He says clock time is the practical, objective use of time. It is scheduling a meeting for 2 p.m., catching a flight at 6 a.m., or setting up your retirement savings plan.
Clock time is absolutely necessary for survival, logistics, and functioning in a society. You have to plan for the future in a practical sense.
But psychological time is something entirely different. Psychological time is the toxic, ego-driven obsession with past regrets and future anxieties.
Right.
It is attaching your core sense of identity and self-worth to a past you can't change or a future that hasn't happened.
It's saying, I am a failure because of what happened 5 years ago, or I will only be worthy of love when I get that promotion next year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tolle argues we must use clock time to function in the physical world, but we must consciously and completely drop psychological time if we want to actually live. We have to stop using time as a measure of our worth.
When you drop psychological time, you stop worrying about the arrival, and you can reach that flow state. And to vividly illustrate what that flow state looks like in action, beyond just modern psychology, the worldview we are exploring points to a beautiful ancient Taoist parable from the philosopher Zhuangzi.
Oh, the story of Cookding.
It is such a good story.
The parable of Cookding is perhaps the perfect ancient representation of flow and autotelic action. The story describes a butcher, Cookding, who is cutting up an ox for a lord. The parable notes that average cooks hack clumsily at the meat, ruining their knives and having to replace them every single month.
Good cooks carve carefully, but they still wear out their blade and need a new knife every year.
But Cookding has used the exact same knife for 19 years, cutting thousands of oxen, and the blade is still as sharp as the day it came from the whetstone.
The Lord, watching him, is amazed. How does he do it? It's not magic, it's total presence.
Right. When asked his secret, Cookding explains that he doesn't hack blindly at the bone, nor does he rely purely on his physical eyes to see what he is doing. He pays total immersive attention to the present moment, feeling the natural anatomy of the ox.
He guides his incredibly thin blade through the natural gaps and empty spaces in the joints.
He flows with the reality of the meat rather than forcing his ego or his will upon it. He isn't rushing to finish the job. He is immersed in the act of cutting.
The Taoists call this trained spontaneity or wu wei, effortless action. He is completely immersed in the task, free of ego, free of a fixed mindset, and completely free of psychological time.
He is pushing his boulder, just like Sisyphus, but he is flowing with it. He found the invincible summer in the butcher shop.
There is also a great Stoic analogy included in this framework that really hammers this home for the modern striver, the analogy of the mountain climber.
How does that one go again?
If you look at an expert mountain climber, they don't endure freezing temperatures, altitude sickness, and physical exhaustion just so they can stand on the peak for 5 minutes. They use the peak merely as an excuse to go climbing. The value is entirely in the climb itself, feeling the rough rock under their hands, breathing the thin, cold air, testing their physical and mental limits.
Think about it rationally. If the only value is being at the top of the mountain, they could just pay for a helicopter to drop them on the summit. They would achieve the goal in 20 minutes with zero effort.
But any true climber would view that as completely defeating the purpose. The goal, the summit, is necessary as an orientation point. It provides direction, but the actual meaning is found entirely in the physical and mental act of ascending. The goal is just the excuse to experience the present moment intensely.
So, applying this to our own lives, I want everyone listening to think about their own reality right now. Look at the primary project taking up your time and energy. It could be your career, raising your kids, paying off a mortgage, or writing a book.
Are you climbing your mountain because you genuinely love the feeling of the rock under your hands? Are you engaged in the process? Or are you just miserable, dragging yourself up the cliff face every single day, hating every second of it simply because you want to take a selfie at the top and prove to everyone else that you did it?
Are you operating in practical clock time, or are you suffocating under the weight of psychological time?
It is a confronting question that demands deep self-reflection. Because if you are only climbing for the selfie, if you are only working for the retirement party, you are trapped squarely in the myth of arrival. You are deferring your life.
You will reach the top, you will take the picture, the confetti will drop, and then the hedonic treadmill will engage, the devil will laugh, and you will immediately start looking for a higher, more dangerous mountain to climb just to escape the crushing emptiness of this summit.
So let's bring the threads of this entire worldview together. We've covered a massive amount of intellectual and psychological ground today. We started by looking at the unavoidable biology of time, how aging forces us to face our finite potential, causing a deep existential dread that makes us want to retreat backward.
And we learned that retreating backward is a trap, because the past we are nostalgic for is a faulty narrative. It is a fictional story constructed by Kahneman's remembering self. Our nostalgia is actually a form of mourning for the fallen figs, the lost possibilities of our youth.
We then explored how, fleeing the past, we project a perfect future, falling hook, line, and sinker for the myth of arrival. We mistakenly believe that if we can just achieve those extrinsic goals, we will defeat our own biology.
We try to outrun the hedonic treadmill, only to be met with the devil's laughter when we inevitably adapt to our success and the emptiness returns.
But we found the antidote to this cycle of restlessness in the courage of hopelessness. We found it in Camus telling us to drop the delusion of the summit and own our boulder like Sisyphus.
We found it in the psychology of flow, acting like cookting in our daily tasks, shutting off the ego, dropping psychological time, and finding the invincible summer in the immediate 3-second window of the experiencing self. That fleeting window is the only place reality actually exists.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought. This comes from the philosopher Alan Watts, whose ideas are woven throughout the source material we analyze today. It is a paradigm shift that ties the existential dread, the psychology, and the Taoism all together.
It's a beautiful way to end.
We spend our entire lives stressed, anxious, and restless, constantly wondering if our self is going to arrive at its destination. We worry if we will be successful, if we will matter, if we will make a mark on the universe. We operate under what Watts calls an illusion of identity.
The illusion is how we fundamentally perceive our place in the cosmos. In the modern Western world, we view ourselves as aliens who are somehow dropped into this world from the outside.
We feel like isolated, separate egos, trapped inside bags of skin, tasked with fighting against and conquering a hostile and different universe. We feel like we have to force the universe to yield to our goals so we can arrive.
But Watts argues that this entire perspective is biologically and philosophically backward. We didn't come into this world from somewhere else, we came out of it, just like a leaf comes out of a tree or a wave comes out of the ocean.
You are an expression of the natural world. You are not a stranger here. You are literally the universe growing a nervous system and making sense of itself. And once you deeply, truly realize that there is no separate, isolated you that needs to desperately arrive anywhere to prove its worth, the anxiety begins to evaporate.
The desperate need to justify your existence through constant restless achievement vanishes. You don't have to prove your right to exist to the mountain. The myth of arrival shatters completely because you realize you were already home the entire time.
You are finally free to just be here right now in the 3-second window of the present. So the next time you finally achieve something, the next time you reach the summit and that confetti drops to the floor and the guests go home and that quiet silence creeps back in, don't let it terrify you. When you hear the devil laugh, don't despair, smile back, pick up your boulder, and just enjoy the push.